Storm the Dragon Legend at Tusenfryd is the first ever installation of Gerstlauer's new Infinity inverted roller coaster, which promises to be the next generation of inverted coaster. Having the prototype version of a new ride system is always a risk, however, so did this risk pay off? And what's it like to ride this new coaster? Let's find out. I'm Rollercoaster David, and this is my review of Storm the Dragon Legend. Let's start off with a look at the layout. Storm starts with a forwards launch that sends you partway up the first element, before gravity takes over and you drop back through the station. You then get launched backwards, partially up a half loop, where you get some brief hang time before you drop forwards again and hit the third launch. You then pull up into an elongated dive loop, inverting before dropping down to the ground and pulling up into a high-speed airtime hill. After this hill is another dive loop, which continues to twist as the track merges into the third inversion, a reverse sidewinder that sends you back into the station. You then hit the brakes and slow down as you overshoot the station, before gently dropping backwards as the ride comes to a full stop. From a physical point of view, it may not look that large or imposing a ride, but this coaster really packs a punch. After my first ride, my immediate thought was, wow, that was vicious, but in a good way. I was expecting a more family-orientated ride without a lot of force, but Storm is actually a high-intensity thrill ride. Vicious may not sound like a positive word for a coaster, but I think highlights the force and aggression this ride has, and how it doesn't hold back in any way. The ride statistics state it pulls 4.7 G, which is really quite a lot, but also states it pulls -1 G of airtime. Now I'm not sure I actually believe that statistic, as I think the -G airtime you experience on this is even stronger. The airtime hill on Storm is brutally strong, and you just have to look how fast the ride takes the hill to appreciate it. This is Skyrush level airtime, and it's the strongest ejector airtime I've experienced on any inverted coaster. It almost felt like my shoes were going to go flying off when the -G hits on this ride. The launches are quite forceful too. The first one doesn't reach a great speed, but there's still quite a sharp kick when it first starts. The second backward launch is probably going to catch you by surprise as well, as it starts quite late into the launch track. I think Gerstlauer have tuned these launches to focus on giving a strong initial kick that doesn't last long, rather than a slow push to the required speed, and it's definitely the way I prefer launches to be. Depending on when you're sat in the train, you can also get some fun upside down hang time at the peak of the reverse launch, and it's a fun sensation to hang upside down and look upwards towards the track above you. The third launch is a real kicker though, and absolutely sends you into the rest of the track layout. It almost feels as if you're being thrown into the rest of the track elements way faster than you should be. The first time you invert after the launch does produce a little bit of a rattle in the train, but with the ferocity of this launch and the forces involved, it really doesn't surprise me, and it's only a brief rattle that isn't too noticeable. What is noticeable is the airtime you get over the top and down, and it's really quite nice sustained floater air all the way through this drop. The pullout is quite sharp though, but as I said before, the way it sends you into the airtime hill afterwards at incredible speed is simply breathtaking. It's the highlight of the ride. The first half of the ride is pure fury, but after the airtime hill the ride does relent a little. The second dive loop inversion is taken a little slower, and has a bit of float to it before the final part of the ride delivers sustained positive G all the way through the final inversion until you hit the brakes. Just before you enter the station, there was another section of track that had a slight rattle, which was more noticeable if you sat in the back, but overall the ride felt pretty smooth, and those two slightly rough bits were very brief and didn't detract from the coaster overall. Now I know in press previews of Storm they did a ride cycle which pushed you through a second lap of the coaster, but sadly I never got to experience that. The standard cycle is already enough though, and packs a whole bunch of forces that by the time you hit the brakes you're almost welcome for that time to catch your breath. For a first attempt at an inverted coaster, I'm actually very impressed at Gerstlauer. It certainly seems that they've done their homework, as the seats in the train are very similar to Vekomas or Intamin's modern designs, but that means they're comfortable and accommodating, and whilst it isn't a feature of this ride, it looks like they can be fitted with an added safety belt to meet part requirements. Honestly though, for a first try at making a thrilling adult inverted coaster, I think Gerstlauer knocked it out of the park. This ride really packs a punch and delivers an extreme level of thrills in a surprisingly small layout. When I visited the park, it wasn't particularly busy, but the ride was still popular. It's located in a new dragon-themed area of the park, and the theming is not overwhelmingly detailed, but gives the section a nice little bit of character. The station also has some light theming, and it sets it nicely in this dragon area, although some areas do feel a little barren. Ride operations were generally satisfactory as well. Like I said, the park wasn't particularly busy, so there didn't really seem to be the need for lots of hustle to run the rides as efficiently as possible. But all the staff seemed to be working diligently, and I never had to wait long to ride. One thing I particularly liked is that Storm has a single rider queue, which I think is essential in a shuttle coaster like this to maximise capacity. Because this sort of ride can only run one train, and each train only holds 16 riders, making sure every seat is filled makes a big difference. Storm also seemed to be pretty reliable as well, although I did see one failed third launch where the coaster didn't make it over the first element and rolled back. There was a brief bit of downtime here when the maintenance team were called out to reset the ride, but apart from that, I think it operated flawlessly all day. So how does it compare to similar rides? Well, to my knowledge, the only other launched inverted coasters are the ones made by Intamin, such as the former Wicked Twister at Cedar Point and Volcano at King's Dominion, and I would say that this is certainly my favourite of any launched inverted coaster. I was never a huge fan of Volcano to begin with, as while the launches were fun, the rest of the layout was quite weak, as the Heartline Rollin' versions were slow and a bit uncomfortable, and the rest of the track just kind of meandered around the mountain, not doing much. I'm aware it had its fans though. Storm provides a much more interesting and varied experience than any of the other Intamin launch coasters, and it does make me wonder why they never extended the layout of the swing launch coasters, as it makes for a much better ride experience than just the backwards-forwards twisted spikes. It's kind of hard to compare Storm to any other inverted coasters, however, as it really packs a punch with the launch and throws you violently into the short and powerful layout in a way that just can't be matched by a coaster that uses a lift hill to provide the energy. It's probably one of the most intense inverted coasters out there, but I'd struggle to compare it to longer and more traditional inverts like Nemesis or Black Mamba, which are much more substantial rides but arguably less intense than Storm. Storm really is a firecracker of a coaster that punches way above its weight in terms of ride forces, but it's still only got a fairly short layout, and in a way I think it probably compares more favourably with Gerstlauer's other short but punchy Infinity coasters, such as Gold Rush at Slaghaven or Fury at Bobbejaanland. Gerstlauer are marketing this design with the lift hill option as well though, and I believe the first version with lift hill is due to open later this year in Colombia, although I've struggled to find any construction updates on that coaster. It'll be interesting to see how the Gerstlauer inverts compare to Vekoma or Intamin's coasters, when the design doesn't have a launch that makes it stand out. I still wouldn't be too surprised however if Vekoma also debuted a launched version of their suspended thrill coaster soon. Overall though, I think Tusenfryd and Gerstlauer have produced a winning coaster here. It's intense and packs a real punch for enthusiasts, although it may be a bit much for younger and less adventurous riders. Its small size though means that it doesn't look too intimidating, so they're still likely to give it a go. Maybe we'll see more of these rides popping up at smaller parks that don't have an inverted coaster and want something a little different. I can definitely see a market space for this style of coaster. So that wraps up my review of Storm the Dragon Legend, so if you have any thoughts or questions about the ride then let me know what you think in the comments. And I'd really appreciate it if you could do all the usual YouTube stuff of liking, sharing and subscribing if you haven't already, to see more reviews from me. If you'd like to see something a little different though, then why not check out my recent series exploring alpine coasters across Switzerland and Austria, as I had an absolute blast driving on mountain roads and riding coasters, and I'd love to share it with you all. I've been Rollercoaster David, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again in another video very soon.